Today I'll be doing Houston. So first I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach Willie Fritz enters his first season as the head coach of Houston and his 28th season as a college head coach. He's been the head coach at four other places. And has been successful at every place that he's coached at. His overall record as a head coach is at 208 and 116. And most recently, he was the head coach of Tulane, where these past two seasons he got them to a 23 and 4 record. But the first 6 years that he was the head coach at Tulane, they never won more than 7 games. So I do think that he's an upgrade for them over Holgerson, but I do think that it's going to take some time for him to get them improved, and I don't really think there's going to be any improvement this year, and if there is, it's not going to be much. So in recruiting, in Houston's first season in the Power Five in 2023, they had the 51st ranked at recruiting class. Which is not very good, but that was understandable because it was their first year. And then uh, this year, the recruiting actually dropped to 60th, so that's not good news. So now, starting on the offensive side of the roster, they were horrible here last year. They need to improve a lot. But good news is Donovan Smith returns at quarterback. He had a pretty good year last year. Not an elite type of quarterback that's going to have a chance to win a Heisman, but I do like him as a quarterback. He's very athletic. He can throw a 50-yard deep ball, and he can get a big run if he can get loose. So last season he had 2,801 passing yards and 22 touchdown passes, completing 64.5% of his passes and averaged 7.1 yards a throw. And he did, though, throw 13 interceptions, which is not good. And he ran for 428 yards and 6 touchdowns. So at wide receiver, this is kind of concerning because they do lose two really good receivers from last season. Now they do have one good receiver back, Joseph Manjack, who had in 10 games last season 46 catches for 577 and 6 touchdowns, averaging 12.5 a catch. He'll probably be their top receiver this year. And then at running back, everybody's back, but they need to play a lot better here. Houston ranked 102 at running the football last year, only averaging 118.7 yards rushing per game. And their leading rusher didn't even have 500 rushing yards. So on the offensive line, this is concerning too. They only have one starter coming back. Now, he is an impact player on their team, right guard Tank Jenkins, who only allowed last season 3 sacks and 5 total pressures. But if your offensive line struggles, your offense usually does struggle. So I think Houston probably is going to struggle again offensively. Uh, and on the defensive side, they were horrible here last year too. They need a lot of improvement. But on the defensive line, they're not going to be improved. They're probably going to be even worse. They don't have any starters coming back. Now, this coach did bring in one of his players from Tulane who was pretty good, Keith Cooper. He had last season 32 tackles and 5 sacks and 8 total pressures and 2 pass breakups. But other than him, they don't have any proven players on their defensive line. And if Houston struggles on the line of scrimmage this year, they're probably going to struggle to win games. So at linebacker, they do look pretty good here. They've got Jamal Morris coming back, who had in 11 games last season at 64 tackles and 5 pass breakups and a forced fumble and fumble recovery and a half a sack and 3 total pressures. And they bring in 2 transfers from the group of 5 level. They bring in Michael Batten from Louisiana Monroe. He had last season 80 tackles and a half a sack and 4 total pressures. And they bring in Kendra Gant from Louisiana, who had last season 64 tackles and 6 sacks and 3 forced fumbles and 3 fumble recoveries and 3 pass breakups and 9 total pressures in 11 games. And the secondary, so at safety, they've got AJ Halsey coming back, who was a really good player, one of the Big 12's best safeties. He was their leading tackler last season with 98 tackles, and he also had 4 pass breakups and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. And then they bring in a bunch of transfer defensive backs. The best safety transfer that they brought in is probably from East Carolina, uh, Keegan Wilk, who had in 2022 55 tackles and 5 pass breakups, and he only played in 4 games in 2023 because of an injury. But at cornerback, their best transfer player is probably an FCS transfer, Chris Davis, who had in 11 games last season, 28 tackles and 12 pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. But they don't really have any good cornerbacks at coming back. So on special teams, they don't look very good. They do have their kicker coming back, but he struggled last season with field goals, and then they're losing their punter. So the roster overall is not very good. It would take some really good coaching to uh, get this roster to play well, I think. So now moving on to the predictions. They start the year against UNLV, and this is a game that Houston could lose. I wouldn't be surprised at all if UNLV upsets them. This, I think, will be a close game because UNLV is a decent team out of the Mountain West, and Houston is not very good, even though they're now Power Four. But I do think that Houston does have enough to get the win. So then they play on the road at Oklahoma. This will be a loss. No chance here. Oklahoma is going to have too much defense for Houston to be able to score much in this game. And Oklahoma may have a weak offensive line at this point in the season because it's inexperienced. But Houston, I don't think, can take advantage of that with their defensive line. And Oklahoma is loaded at the wide receiver and running back positions. They'll give Houston a hard time with stopping their offense. So then they play Rice. This isn't a given win either. I do think that Houston will win, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a pretty close game. Rice isn't a horrible group of 5 team. So then they play on the road at Cincinnati. So these two teams, I think, are pretty similar. Actually, I would say that Cincinnati probably has a little bit better roster than Houston, but Houston does have better coaching. The coaching at Cincinnati is terrible, but Cincinnati has home field advantage, and I think that makes the difference. And Cincinnati wins a really close one. So then they play Iowa State. So I did the Iowa State video. I had thought about picking an upset for Houston, but I couldn't do it when I actually looked at the rosters. Iowa State's much better at the line of scrimmage, and they've also got a pretty good quarterback coming back, and they've got better wide receivers, and they've got a solid defense really everywhere. So then they play on the road at TCU on a Friday night. I think this will probably be pretty close, but I've got to go with TCU. they've got a lot more talent on their team than Houston does, and home field advantage. So then they play on the road at Kansas after getting a week off. Kansas is going to have too much offense for Houston in this game. Uh, now, I've said Kansas's offensive line is not that good, but Houston, I don't think, can really take advantage of that. Kansas will score a lot of points, I think, because Kansas is really good at quarterback and running back and wide receiver. And Kansas's front seven is not going to be that good, I don't think. But I don't really think Houston is going to be able to take advantage of that. They don't really have the offensive line or running backs to do that. And Kansas's secondary is really good, one of the best in the Big 12, and I think they'll slow down the Houston passing attack. And I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I do think that Kansas will win this by a couple of scores. And then Utah at home, this will be a loss. I don't think this will be close at all. It could be a blowout. So Utah is pretty good everywhere on their roster and really good in some places, like the line of scrimmage. They'll beat up Houston at the line of scrimmage, and they've got a good wide receiver coming in, Dorian Singer, and they've got a really good tight end, Brent Cuthie, who will give teams problems this year. Probably will give Houston problems in this game, and I think that Utah also has an advantage in the secondary in this game. Uh, and at running back, they've got a big advantage too, and they've got an even better quarterback with Cameron Rising. So then they play Kansas State. This is kind of the same thing with Utah. They're a very physical team that will beat up Houston at the line of scrimmage. And when you control the line of scrimmage, you usually win the game. Kansas State will win this one by at least a couple of scores, I think. Now, they're not going to be that good of a passing team. Houston probably actually has a better quarterback than Kansas State, but Kansas State's got a much better run game, and their defense is solid everywhere. And then they play on the road at Arizona on a Friday night, most likely after getting a week off. This will be too much offense for Houston to win this game. Arizona, explosive offense led by quarterback Noah Fafata will score a lot of points on them. And Houston, I think, will score some in this game. Arizona's defense isn't going to be great, but they don't have the type of offense to keep up. But it could end up being pretty close. So then they play Baylor at home. So these two teams' rosters are pretty similar, in my opinion. But Houston has a coaching advantage, I think, and they're playing at home. So I'm going with them to get a pretty close win over Baylor. Then they play on the road at BYU to end the season. The rosters are pretty similar, and Houston, though, does have a coaching advantage, but BYU does have home field advantage, and I'm going to go with BYU, but this is a toss-up game, in my opinion. Neither team is very good. But my final prediction for Houston is 3-9 overall and 1-8 in the conference. So I think that Houston does have a little bit of a chance to get to a bowl game. I think their ceiling is probably 6-6, but not even any of the three wins I've picked them to get are guaranteed wins. So I think it's possible they could even do as bad as 2-10 this year. But that will be it with this video, and thanks for watching. And please subscribe. And if you want, you can tell me in the comments that I'm just a stupid idiot that hates Houston and they're going to win the Big 12 this year. But you're going to be in for a big disappointment if you think that.